Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt. If you are watching this live, thank you for your patronage. I appreciate it. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for watching. And if you're interested at all in joining my patrons for these live streams, there's a link down in the description to check out my Patreon, where I post all kinds of cool stuff and also do monthly live streams. So, I cranked up my bit rate tonight on OBS, so we'll see if we run into any issues. So far, no drop frames, so that's good. That's the main concern, obviously, but let me know how the video and audio look, and I can adjust on the fly as needed. Tonight's stream is going to be primarily a Q&A, but we can, of course, deviate from that as the mood strikes us. I've got a few questions already lined up, and the people in chat, namely Mr. Jeff Doty, have already supplied me with a couple of questions as well. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on the chat, live chat. So if anyone in the chat has any questions, feel free to put them in there. But I've also got some questions that I've compiled on Twitter and as well the Patreon. So this is what I primarily want to talk about, is that I own a mason jar mug that is black glass shaped like a skull. I got this for $7 in a secondhand shop, and it's maybe the best thing I've ever bought. I feel really excited about it, and I'm not drinking anything fun out of it right now. I'm just drinking water, but it makes me feel like a wizard. So that's kind of my go-to right now, is if it makes me feel like a wizard, that's good. So I want to talk about that. And then the other thing I want to talk about before we get started is this. This right here is my new companion. This is a wallet notebook from Rustico. They are makers of fine leather goods, and they also deal in some dope-ass pens. This is my favorite pen of all time. They sell these pens. They're called Tornadoes. I have one. I know Barker has one. I think Lloyd Yarldiem has one as well. They're really cool. Anyway, this notebook, I'm really excited about it. And you can see I've already been filling the pages up. I don't really have a way for taking notes on the go. And having something like this has been a need of mine for some time. And this was a Christmas gift from my good friend Barker and his wife. So I really appreciate that, and I've already gotten some great use out of it. It's really cool. It feels really nice. It's like, oh, it smells so good. And it came with a space pen, which I've always wanted to own a space pen. Which it's so tiny. It's so small. But then you open it up and you put the cap on and it becomes like a normal size pen. I feel like it breaks the laws of physics every time I do it. I'm like, what? It's that big. And then it's that big. Like, I don't understand. Anyway, that's really cool too. Writes really well. Works in zero grav underwater. So you know I need that. Anyway, that's the second thing. And then the third and final thing before we get started here, while we wait for people to show up, is I already showed this to my Star Wars players, but this is, I'm going to be hanging this up. Oh god, you can see my computer screen. Good thing I didn't have like a bunch of porn up on my screen or something. You can see I have an X-Wing wallpaper right now, and there I am in the screen. What the hell? You can see my desk? Oh god. Okay, anyway, let's try to get the glare off of it. This is a print that I bought from Mr. Colin Cantwell. That's his signature right here. And this is the original art, concept art, of what would become the X-Wing Starfighter. So Colin Cantwell, he's the original ship designer. He did the X-Wing, the Y-Wing, the TIE Fighter, the Death Star, the Star Destroyer, the Millennium Falcon, the Blockade Runner, just a ton of the original ships. And a lot of his designs have factored into other ships as well. Ships from the prequels, even the sequel trilogy. And I went to a lecture that he was hosting at the Tacoma Art Museum, and it was really cool. It was really awesome to hear him talk about ship design and sort of his philosophy when it comes to design and art and creating and inspiration and stuff. And honestly, even though like I'm not an artist and I don't really like think that much about like the physical design of things, it was still beneficial for me as a creator and someone who works in designing things, designing games and things like that, just because the way he thought about design was such an interesting perspective, and it was so cool to hear him talk about that. So anyway, I thought that was neat too. So anyway, those are the three cool things that I have sitting within arm's reach of me right now. So we're going to move on from that and answer some questions. So I think what I'll do first is I'll answer one of the questions I got on Twitter, and then we'll go ahead and look at the chat here as well. So this question from Twitter actually comes from Barker. He's at Inspire the Barks on Twitter, and he said, what part of your creative work do you find the most exciting and enjoyable? What strategies do you recommend to get yourself into that mental headspace as opposed to waiting for the inspiration to strike? This is a really good question. And I think everyone who creates struggles with this to some extent. This idea of how do you like bottle inspiration and motivation to just sit and create things? Because, you know, sometimes you can just create in a flurry, and it comes from you like it's as natural as breathing, right? And then other times it's like it's a chore just to get a single word onto a page. And if you are a person who creates for a living, if you're a person who has limited time, if you're a person who has time set aside for creating, it's like you can't really just wait for the muse to strike, right? You have to be able to sit down and you have to be able to work. And so I think for me, the biggest thing is that it comes with time. There's not really a tried and true method by which I am able to suddenly be creative or utilize that feeling of being motivated and creative, inspired. But if you're able to set aside time every day, every other day, just have a regular schedule where this is the time that I sit down and I create. And most days you're going to create shit. It's going to be bad. But that's part of the process, right? And there's this concept in writing fiction called the shitty first draft, where it's like that has to happen. So many people, if they're writing, if they're creating, and they're not happy with it, they feel like they're wasting their time or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that you have to fail forward with anything, with any endeavor, but with creativity, certainly, with writing and creating, because that shitty first draft has to happen. And it might be that, you know, out of 5 days that you work, 4 of them are shitty first drafts. But on the fifth day, you create something really worthwhile, and something that you're able to take and move forward into the next phase. Then that is something that you can go on, right? So the more that you do that, the less dependent you are on the shitty first draft, the more that you're able to just sit down and get into that mode. I find that if I only create sort of when I'm feeling like it just never happens. And that's for years and years and years, for a decade or more. That's what I did, is I just waited until I felt like creating. And as was so often the case, that it just never happened. And forcing yourself to do it is the best way to do it. So I guess to answer your question, Barker, it's it comes with time, and I feel like that's a cop-out answer, but it's just the truth. Like, I've gotten more efficient at creating and generating content just in the last few years, just by necessity, just because I've had to, because I've had deadlines, or because I've had a product to deliver, or because, you know, the 2 hours in the evening after my daughter goes to bed is the only time of day that I get to create things. So it's just out of necessity at this point. Okay. Let's dive into the chat here. We got a good question from Jeff. He says, when starting a project for design, what's your process for deciding mechanics/concept? Do you decide on an idea first and look for systems to express it, or pick a system and then match ideas? He says, you've done a lot of system hacks, and I'm curious whether the settings or systems draw in your design sense first. For example, did you decide on mecha theme or black hack first when making what would be the mecha hack? So this is an interesting question, and it's another cop-out answer, but it really depends. But I think that most of my game design comes from a we did drop a few frames, it looks like. So I may have stuttered there for a second. Sorry about that. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I'll drop the bitrate if I have to. But most of my design comes from a place, a desire to have that thing. And so, you know, our motto at Absolute Tabletop is we make what we use. And to press that further, I make what I want, like what I need at the table. And so in the case of something like the Mecha Hack, it was late at night and I was watching 08th MS Team, which is this amazing mecha property, this Gundam show. And I was just sitting there thinking, I want a system where I can run this. I want to run this. And there's nothing like that out there. There are mech systems out there, but they're finicky, they're fiddly, there's too many moving parts and pieces, and sometimes that's great, but if I want to jump on the Absolute Tabletop group and run a 08th MS Team one-shot, there's no system for me to be able to do that without, you know, taking something like Fate or, you know, Savage Worlds and completely, you know, doing my own reskin or whatever. And so it came from a desire to have a small pick-up-and-play mech system. And I saw that there wasn't anything like that. And two, I needed it. And so it became then, if I'm going to create this, what's the best system with which to do that, right? And I think that deciding that it was going to be a black hack based system was merely the fact that I felt like that captured the mechanical heart of what I wanted it to be. And so with the black hack, you have binary success and you don't have DCs that range, right? And it's all GM facing roles. And so all of those facets combine into making a system that feels really fast. Because it's only the players rolling. They know immediately whether they succeeded or not. And the GM is freed up to run the game and throw challenges at the players, which to me fit the need that I had, which was I need a system that is fast, that is light, that is nimble and versatile, that I'm able to run mech games with. And so from there, I started digging into the black hack and trying to decide whether or not it was going to work, because black hack is D&D based, right? It's sort of OSR. And so the first big major departure that I decided on was ability scores, attributes, because black hack has strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, charisma. Did I just forget one? Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. The 6 standard attributes. And that didn't fit for me with mechs. And as I was writing the system, that was really clear to me, like right up front, was like, this doesn't work. Like, I don't like a mech having charisma. I don't like a mech having wisdom. I like a mech that has like sensors. I like a mech that has, you know, that is mobile. And from there, it was really easy to decide, you know, just based on the mech properties that I loved and enjoyed, what what did you need to be able to do with this system? So, Jeff, to answer your question, it depends. Sometimes the setting comes first. Sometimes the system comes first. Like, for instance, Harbinger was created out of a want for me to do some sci-fi 5e. So with that, the setting came later. So that's sort of the opposite of what happened with Mecha Hack, where it was like, I want to make a mech game. Oh, I'm going to use the Black Hack. With Harbinger, it was, I want to write a sci-fi 5e game. Oh, it's going to be Harbinger. You know what I mean? So it really depends, but it always comes from something that I want. Something that I want to be able to use as a game master, and ergo, something I think, maybe there are some other people out there that would benefit from that as well. So that's a long answer, but... Okay. Let's answer another question from the chat here, because we've got some good ones. Barker says, that slow jam is so mellow, I've started doing cocaine recreationally. That's kind of my goal here with these streams. More questions for the question god. What are, in your own opinion, your greatest design strengths and weaknesses? Also, feel free to extrapolate that are to GM players' strengths, weaknesses, if you want. Cool. So I think that my biggest strengths and weaknesses as a game designer is, one of my weaknesses is that I have a hard time thinking about the big picture, and I tend to get a little bit lost in the weeds when I'm designing things. Like, for instance, I'm working on a system right now that will probably see the light of day in 2020, and it's been really difficult because I know like the systems that it needs, and I know the minutia of it, and like from a micro level I feel good about it. From a macro level, though, it's like it's hard for me to be like, do these mechanics serve the setting? Do these mechanics, are they thematic mechanics? Are they mechanics that feel like they're pushing the theme and the tone of this? And are they mechanics that promote what I want players to do with this game? I really like the way that Adam Coble, designer of Dungeon World, talks about game design. And he talks about how you should be able to tell what a game wants you to do based on the mechanics that it's giving you. And it's so easy to say, like, oh, you can use any system for anything. You can use D&D to run a firefighters game or whatever. And it's like, yes, that's true. You can the systems are there to serve the table, the needs of the table. But to a certain extent, it's a cop-out answer, and it kind of minimizes the importance of forward thinking in game design and intentionally designing a game and thinking about not just what is the resolution mechanic in this game, what's an easy way to roll some dice and figure out what happens. Not just thinking about that, but thinking about how can you do that and also tell the players a little bit about the world. How can the player, in rolling the dice, get a feel for what it is that they're supposed to be doing? What is the theme of this setting? So I have a hard time sometimes seeing the big picture, and it's difficult because I'm so into that idea. Looking at something like Troika or Mothership or Legend of the Five Rings, and seeing how intentionally designed they are, to the point where when you are resolving something in the game mechanically, or even just reading through the rule book and learning how the game plays, you're also learning about the world, the themes that the game is presenting. With Mothership, it's obviously like, isolation and hopelessness and horror, cosmic horror, survival, and that comes through in the art and the layout and the mechanics of the book. So I want to be better at that. I want to be more intentional about game design, and I consider that to be a pretty big weakness of mine. Not that that's a bad thing, because I think that at a micro level, I'm really good at thinking about how things kind of hang together and how mechanics should work and stuff like that. But when it comes to zooming out and seeing we have this system in place, this system in place, this system in place, and this system in place, they all need to work together and serve the setting and the story that is being told. That is where it gets kind of hinky for me and gets tough. So I want to focus on that a little bit more in 2020 as I move forward in this project that I'm working on. Jeff asks, what's the biggest perspective shift that you've had in regards to creative work of any type, whether from advice, a discovery, or anything? Ooh, man, that's tough. I think going back to what I was just talking about, hearing Adam Koebel talk about game design really helped put into perspective, because I have been one of those people in the past that has said, like, you can use D&D for anything. Like, D&D 5th edition is a system that can do anything. Why learn a new system when you can just use the system that you already know and just kind of reskin, stuff. But in the last couple of years, and ever, since I've started getting into game design of my own, it's like I don't feel that way anymore. And it's honestly, it can be disheartening, because you realize just how much work goes into game design. And even if you're using an existing system, Mecha Hack, Harbinger, those are all based on existing mechanics that somebody else wrote. I know that the numbers hang together because somebody else did it, right? But it requires so many different parts of your brain. And I feel like saying, well, you can use that system for anything, it just diminishes how much effort and expertise goes into game design. So that's been a big perspective shift for me, is that, like, it's okay to have a game that fills a niche, that is tooled for something specifically, that is pushing a specific theme and tone and telling you, this is what you do with this game, this is how you earn experience, this is how you advance, this is the objectives that you should have in this game, that sort of thing. So Jeff says, nothing gets me motivated like a good deadline. I tell it to everyone I work with, please God, someone hold me accountable, and I turn into a monster of productivity. Deadlines are essential. They're just, it's why I have 18 personal projects languishing in, my Google Drive, half finished, but, I'll knock out 90,000 words of editing in a week if I have a deadline. So yeah. We have a question here from Heather, Barker's wife. What's the coolest inspiration you've gotten from taking a walk or being outside? Oh man. Just the other day, this is not my answer, but it's funny that you mentioned that, because just the other day, I'm pulling up something on my phone here. I was walking around downtown Tacoma, and I saw this architecture I've never seen before, and it really caught my eye. I'm gonna try and show it on the screen here. Oh, it's gonna be all fuzzy, but it's like it's basically like a walkway. It's like stairs that sort of switch back up, leading up onto Commerce Street. And I had never been that deep into downtown before. I've lived in Tacoma for years, and I'd never been down in that area, at least not been on foot looking around. But it was so Blade Runner. Like, it was very, like, there's actually a lot of like Blade Runner-esque architecture in Tacoma, which is cool. But I just saw this like very like stark, these like jutting structures, and it just like looked really cool, and it kind of inspired me to do some other stuff. But to actually answer the question, I think it's hard to pin down one thing, because I almost always come up with something or get inspired when I'm on a walk. Walking it's just the best way to get over the hump in terms of creativity. I always come up with cool stuff on a walk, which is one of the reasons why I need this, because it's so easy to come up with an idea and then be like, oh, I'll remember it, and then you don't remember it. It's having something like this where you can write it down is crucial. But it's really easy here where I live in the Pacific Northwest to walk around and just feel like the world around you. It is so verdant and wild here. I can drive 10 minutes and I'm in a forest, you know, like a forest, not just a park, but a forest where like bears live and other things too, but like specifically bears. And just walking around, taking all of that in, I always come up with cool ideas. And it could be something as simple as, you know, I see an overturned tree and the roots are spiraling out from this center sort of dip. And I think about, what if there was a throne? Like someone sat in a throne that was an overturned tree with its roots kind of spiraling out. Or it could be something like when my wife and I went to the San Diego Zoo and we were in one of the aviaries. The San Diego Zoo has like 3 aviaries, by the way. It is incredible. And there were all these amazing creatures in these aviaries, and we would just sit in the aviary and just like look at these creatures, mostly birds. And I remember like coming up with a creature, and this creature is going to be in the super secret project that I was talking about just a little bit ago, this sort of back burner project. But just the way this bird looked and the way that it moved and the call that it had was just like nothing I'd ever seen before. And it immediately just like, I got to do something with that. It wasn't even like a specific like, oh, that's perfect for blank. It was like, that's going to be something. I know it. And I feel like that is like, that's a good feeling as a creative person, to see something that just grabs you to the point where you don't even know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something like that. I'm going to work that into a D&D game, a book, a short story, game design, like something that is going to be something. And that happens all the time to me. Walks are awesome. Just being out in nature is awesome. I always get a ton of ideas, a ton of inspiration. Okay, let's grab... We've got a great question here that I don't want to forget about, because Sarah, one of my patrons, she has missed both streams, unfortunately. The first stream, I believe she missed it because it was her birthday. So that's a good... that is a very good excuse. But she asked a question in the hopes that I would answer it so she can listen in later. So she says, I'm trying to write a D&D 5e one-shot set in the magic setting of Kaladesh, in the main city of Girapur. I have all the resources for inspiration, an art book, cards, Planeshift D&D guide, but realize I don't have much experience with city-based adventures, and I'm not very good with the political intrigue. Girapur is very much a rebels versus the government thing, and it's also more technology-based than a traditional D&D setting. I feel like I have a good handle on how to outline a simple, tight one-shot, but do you have any advice on writing a city-based one-shot? And or any tips for applying 5e mechanics to an adventure set in a tech-based city setting with mostly political interactions going on? So, obviously that's a big question, and there's a lot going on there. But it's also a good question. In that it's like, hey, I'm like really good at coming up with a one shot, like a simple one shot, but like how do I work in a one shot in a sprawling city and have like political intrigue and stuff happening? Obviously that's a whole different beast. It's difficult in a one-shot to get across that feeling of political intrigue, because it's tough to sort of like have that push and pull feel in a game that's going to last, 3 hours at the most. So if you're running a one-shot and you want to get across that feel of political intrigue, maybe you want to, rather than just hint at it, have it kind of be at the forefront. I'm not super familiar with Kaladesh, but I know that it's like Magitech, like inventors sort of thing, and that there is this like government that controls like the tech and the magic and stuff. Maybe the player characters are involved in this rebellion. Just have it be that's the one shot. I want to get across this feeling of intrigue, of an oppressive government and a rebellion. And I need to do that in a very short time frame. So have them be in the rebellion. You know what I mean? Like have the session start with they're doing a heist or a job or spying or doing something disrupting this sort of oppressive regime that is pushing back against progress here. So that's a really easy way to do it in a one shot. In terms of your other parts of your questions here about running a game in a city, and also dealing with tech, stuff like that. So I'm running a 5e home group right now, set in this crazy gonzo world called Synth Shard, where there's like dinosaurs and blasters and all kinds of crazy stuff. And that right now is predominantly set in a city. It's like a settlement. And the thing that I've really enjoyed doing is just like seeding this city with hooks, little plot hooks. And it really gets across this feel of like this big expansive city with lots of different people in it. But I don't necessarily have to come up with like every single person, right? So like I came into the first session where they got to this city and I had, I think, 7 or 8 plot hooks ready to go. And so depending on where they wanted to go, it was like one of these situations where they walk in and I go, all right, so I describe the city, I give them some sensory details about what it looks like, what it smells like, what it sounds like. And then I talk about the different locations that they can go check out. You see that there's a tavern. There appears to be someone selling weapons over here. There's a guardhouse over here. And I kind of set up the first couple of locations. And then from there, they can decide where they want to go, and once they get there, that might seed out into other locations, other NPCs, other places. If they go in the tavern, there might be an NPC there who is like, oh, I got mugged and they stole this, priceless piece of technology that I've been working on. It's this invention and I'm really proud of it. And now they have it and I don't have the motivation to start over. I'd give anything to get it back. And it's like, hey, that's an adventure hook. Maybe we can help you. Well, the last, place I saw it, I got mugged in this alleyway over here. Let's go check out that alleyway, and then, oh my God, the adventure's afoot. They're in the city. Urban adventuring, that sort of thing. The nice thing about a city is that it can be very varied, very varied. I'm a writer, semi-professionally, and I just said very varied. It can be varied in a very short, like a very narrow sort of scope. It's like if you've ever walked around a city, any city, even one that's small, there are areas of that city where it's like it's a completely different place, different people, different like culture. The buildings look different, everything smells different and sounds different. And so a city is a really awesome opportunity for you as a game master to like flex those muscles and really have a lot of things going on. One tip that I can give you too with running this type of game, this sort of like not necessarily a sandbox, but just kind of a more open-ended, like explore the city and pick up some jobs sort of thing, is that make sure that your players are keeping track of the people that they meet and the jobs that they're taking on. If they have a list of things that they can go and do and check out and work on, it's gonna be a lot easier for them to like keep track of that stuff. So make sure that they're doing that. And then in terms of the tech, honestly, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I know that seems like a stupid answer, but like there's no technology in Kaladesh that is going to be more wondrous or powerful than, a mid-level wizard casting a spell. And so with technology, obviously, comes the wide distribution of things like that. And so I would just like focus on what the society looks like with that technology. If there are flying vessels, which I think there are in Kaladesh, I think like ornithopters and stuff are a big thing in Kaladesh. Describe them. If they're in a city, there are ornithopters everywhere. They can get around. There's trains or public transit, or they can hop on an ornithopter and pay the guy a couple silver pieces to take him across town, that sort of thing. The technology would factor into the day-to-day life of the people here in this city. The way that they work, the way that they commute, the way that they build things, would all be different, and the technology would factor into that. So just think about that when you're describing things and when you're kind of seeding the city with these little these fun adventure hooks that you want them to grab onto and pursue. Think about how you can kind of also sprinkle little inventions and cool gizmos and things like that into the forefront. So, Sarah, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to hit me up on the Patreon if you have any more questions, or if I didn't quite give you what you were looking for. But I'm happy to help you out as much as you need. We have another question here from my good friend Taylor, Mom's the Nerd on Twitter. She asks, what was your first break into the industry and how did it happen? This is a fun question. So I actually had to think about this, but I think that the first work that I had in the tabletop games industry was for Fantasy Flight Games. And it was for a game called Twilight Imperium. And specifically, it was working on an expansion called Shards of the Throne. So when I was out of college, so I was about 22 or 23 years old, I was really trying to bolster my portfolio a little bit. I knew that I wanted to be a writer or an editor, but I wasn't sure exactly what avenue I wanted to pursue. I was an English major. I had my degree. I had a lot of work in publications on the college campus, the newspaper, the literary journal, but none of that really carries a lot of weight outside of college. And so I was working at a game store, playing a lot of board games, playing a lot of RPGs, and I decided it might be fun to try and maybe turn my passion, my hobby, gaming, into some side hustle, some money, and more importantly, bolstering my portfolio and my resume. And so I started reaching out to companies, and I emailed the usual people. Reach out to like Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, all the big sort of names in RPGs, and lots of board game companies. And heard back from a few people saying that, we don't really have any work at the moment, but we'll keep you in the loop. But the one person that did get back to me was a guy named Zach over at Fantasy Flight Games. And he's still my contact over there to this day. And he got back to me and he said that they're, hey, we're kind of always looking for freelance proofreaders and copy editors. So if you're interested, we have a test that you can take. This is fairly standard with editing and proofreading. Is you'll do an editing test. They'll give you a short piece that you have to edit, and just so they can see that you're not an idiot, or at least that you're competent in editing. So they sent me a test. I think it was they still had the Warhammer license at the time, and I think it was a piece of Warhammer fiction or something that I had to edit. And from there, they gave me some work. It was so cool. It was so surreal. And I remember I was so anxious, and I must have read that damn rule book for Shards of the Throne 4 or 5 times just to make sure I didn't forget anything or miss anything. But that was kind of my first foray into this industry, into being an editor in the tabletop games industry. And I still work with Fantasy Flight. I've worked on a bunch of expansions for Descent. I worked on the 3rd edition of Arkham Horror. I've worked on some stuff for Elder Sign, Mansions of Madness, just all kinds of stuff. My dream would be to eventually work on something Star Wars for them. I've mentioned that a few times, but they haven't taken me up on it yet, so we'll see. But yeah, from there, it was kind of I would love to say that it snowballed, but it was a very slow, gradual process. And, it's still not my full-time gig doing game stuff. There will be a few weeks, last couple years where I will only be working on game stuff, where I'm making enough money working in games to not have to supplement with other stuff. But it's a tough industry to make it your full-time gig. At this point, I still only consider myself to be semi-professional technically, because I'm not, usually I'm not paying all my bills with that stuff. But over the years, I've kind of picked up other clients and other contacts in the industry and done work for Wizards and Chaosium, and Green Ronin has been a really consistent client of mine. They are always happy to toss me work, and they're really fun to work with over there. Recently picked up work with Awaken Realms. They do big box board games with these amazingly detailed miniatures and really cool components, and I worked on a game with them called Tainted Grail, and I am going to be working on the expansions for Tainted Grail as well here coming up in early 2020, which I'm really excited about. There's like 3 or 4 supplemental sort of things that were part of the Kickstarter that they did for the game that I'm going to be working on, which is really cool. So, and then obviously, a few years ago, starting Absolute Tabletop with a few of my best friends and having that be an avenue for self-publishing and writing the things that I want to create is just the most wonderful outlet. And I would not change that for the world. So, turned into a fairly long-winded answer, but to answer your question, Taylor, the first break I got was from Fantasy Flight Games. Old Zach over at Fantasy Flight. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Okay, so we got a couple more questions here in the chat. We're doing good on time. We haven't dropped any more frames. Life is good. Let me drink out of this skull real quick. Jeff asks, by the way, thank you, Barker and Jeff, for hanging out with me. I think it's just you two guys at this point. Last time I did a stream, it was just Nathan Like. That dude hung out with me while I prepped for my Star Wars game. What's the strangest or most distant place you've ever drawn inspiration from in regards to RPGs? Where have you found influence that others might not expect to tie into your normal work? Man, that is a great question. Oh, I know the answer though immediately. My daughter has these blocks. They're called tagrams. Tagram blocks, and they're these very simple shapes. They're like rectangles, squares, diamond shapes, like rhomboid, like weird. I don't know what the technical term is, but it's like slanted on both sides and then lines going through. And these blocks are really fun because you can kind of lay them out and you can make shapes. You could like make a giraffe with the tagram blocks, and there's actually like there will be things where it's like it's somewhat of a puzzle. It'll be like, can you make this shape with the tagram blocks? And I won't tell you what blocks to use, but it'll show you the shape, and you have to decide what blocks to use or whatever. Anyway, I was playing with her blocks, and I haven't put this into a game yet, but I have an idea of where it's going. But I thought about, wouldn't it be cool if there was a game where you could use tagram shapes to build something, like a vehicle? What if everyone has a vehicle, and the different components that you choose for the vehicle, this engine, this weapon, this chassis, whatever, they're tagram shapes, and you can put them together in any configuration, and so everyone has a cool little like silhouette of what their thing looks like. And that was one of those things where I'm just like, I'm laying on the floor with my daughter, like playing with these blocks, and I'm like making little like hover vehicles, and I'm like, this is cool. Like, this is really satisfying to do. Like, I wonder if I could make this into some sort of game mechanic. So anyway, I think I'll use that at some point in something, but I just love the idea of it. So that's probably the weirdest place that I've gotten some like tangible inspiration from. Jeff says, I'm working on a hack for getting across Dragon Ball, and I'm stuck between feeling like I need non-combat skills like normal and knowing that they'll be pretty neglected in play with all the fighting. Yeah, that's tough, Jeff. That's like what else happens in Dragon Ball? I guess in Z specifically, there's a lot of fighting, but the original Dragon Ball, there's a lot of like traveling around, finding things, surviving, like negotiating with people. Like the original Dragon Ball has a lot more going on. But if you're going for the Z tone, literally nothing else happens in that show except for fighting or waiting for the next fight or watching a fight. So that's tough. Like, do you put skills in there in the hope that somebody finds a use for them, or do you just not because you know it's just not going to happen? That sort of thing. That's tough. Okay, cool. I think that I have gotten through all of the questions here. And I've got about 10 more minutes on the clock here, so I can talk a little bit about what we've got coming up here on the old Patreon. Stuff you guys can look forward to. One thing that I'm working on right now for Star Wars December, obviously I'm continuing the Mandalorian posts with cool stuff from the Mandalorian that you can use in Hyperspace D6, or any Star Wars system of your choosing. But one thing I'm going to be doing that I'm pretty excited about is I'm statting out some classic Star Wars monsters for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So like the Rancor, the Wampa, I'm doing Rathtars from The Force Awakens. I'm doing the monsters from the arena in Attack of the Clones. And so I'm statting these monsters out in 5th edition so that you can use them in your D&D game, because I feel like Star Wars monsters are so cool and fun, like having so many things going on, that it would be cool to be able to take like a Rancor and just reskin it as something else in your fantasy world and use that stat block. So anyway, I think that'll be kind of fun. I'm working on that post. That's going to be a bigger post, probably landing near the end of the month, which I'm pretty excited about. So another thing I'm working on is a Table Tactics post about trilogies. It's called The Case for the Trilogy. Or no, The Case for Trilogies. I can't remember what I'm calling it. But basically, the idea that the trilogy is the sweet spot. It's better than a one-shot because you are able to grow the characters a little bit, develop something of a story, an arc for them, and explore some themes that you wouldn't otherwise be able to explore in a one-shot, but you're able to knock it out in 3 sessions and then move on to the next thing. Trilogies are kind of my jam right now, and so that's kind of why I'm working on that post. And then we have another post, something that was requested by Skull patron Ben Fisher, wants me to write up a post about how to run a like stealth infiltration session or challenge without just having everybody be rogues. How would you run a stealth heist infiltration game with a party that had a monk and a fighter and a cleric and a wizard? You know what I mean? So that should be fun as well. I'm about halfway done with that post, and that'll be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, so all that stuff's pretty fun. And in terms of what else I got going on, writing a ton on Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. We're close. We're so close with that book. And it's really exciting to be as close as we are. Layout for that is a constant as well, and that's going to be hitting real hard in January. So I imagine that January will probably be a pretty quiet month for me in terms of social media presence and stuff on the Patreon. I'll still put up a post per week, obviously, but might not be as frequent with the Table Tactics articles, just because I'll be so swamped with Dead Man's Guide layout and stuff like that. So January should be pretty quiet, and then hitting pretty hard in February and March and stuff like that. So yeah, holidays are coming up here, so this will be the last stream before Christmas and New Year's and all of that. So I hope that everyone has a really happy holiday. I'll go ahead and make this particular stream public next week so that people can watch it over the Christmas holiday if they so choose. So if you're watching this near Christmas, Merry Christmas. Hope you have a good one. Happy holiday. And yeah, we'll be doing another stream next month. I'll put up a poll so you guys can vote, and we'll see what we want to do. Thanks everyone for watching, for sticking around. Jeff and Barker in the chat, thank you guys for being so active and supplying so many good questions. I feel like we had good conversations here. And also of note, I forgot to mention this. We're going to be doing another episode of Radimus Prime, the podcast that I record with my good friend Tim Carney from Tabletop Terrors. And we just might have a guest joining us to talk about Star Wars. I'm going to get copyright claims by Disney if I do that anymore. Anyway, look forward to all of that. Lots of awesome stuff on the horizon. Patreon continues to grow. Really trying to hit that 50 patron goal so we can have a monthly podcast. I feel like that would be really cool. So share it around with your friends, your grandma, if she would be interested in RPGs. I don't know. Somebody's grandma might be. Take care, everybody. Again, link to the Patreon's down in the description. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care. Happy gaming all. And happy holidays.